This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. Joining me this week, spooky, scary skeletons. They've sent shivers down my spine. Kait Lamphere.
Let's rattle.
And Kate Scotchless.
How am I supposed to top that? Thanks a lot.
Well, welcome to episode 301 of I Read Comic Books. You may have heard the brand new opening music. Very excited about it. Infinity Shred continues to be the best band in the universe. I love it. Before we get into the episode, I want to say that I am completely floored. We have only 2 slots of 12 left in our $10 commission an episode tier of Patreon. So if you want to commission an episode of I Read Comic Books, make sure you join that as soon as possible, because I think they're going to be gone after this week. I don't know. We'll see. But anyways, for those of you that have already signed up, look for a message from me probably coming this week. I've got a little bit of time off because it's my birth week. Everyone should be nice to me this next week. But I'm also going to be sending out a message to everybody to get the ball rolling on some of those commissioned episodes. So get hyped for that.
Everyone should be nice to Mike all the time. He is a precious, precious cinnamon roll.
No.
Who's
okay.
hurting you, Mike? Let me at him.
It's okay. You know what? If people could just be nice to me for 1 week, that's all I care about. But it has to be everyone. It's all or nothing. If one person is mean, this throws the whole thing off. So I'm just throwing that out there. One other thing I will say, our Discord book club is back. It's coming back. We're starting it again on October 23rd. So look for that. If you're not on the Discord, make sure to join that. We're going to be reading Monstrous Volume 1. I'm very excited about that. I think it's something that we've read for our Goodreads book club at one point. I just don't think I actually read it. So I'm reading it for the first time finally.
You heard
but I'm
Mike's
very excited
confession
to do that.
Here, folks.
Yeah. I apologize with all the other book comics that I read. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to read that one. But speaking of that, let's talk about comic books. Let's get into things. I have this legally mandated pair of questions I need to ask you, which is, how have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Kate Scotchless.
Comics have been so good. Okay, so I was the one who proposed our topic for today about witches, because you know what I love in my comic books is witches. And then I had an excuse to get an enormous stack of comics from my library. Michigan has an interlibrary loan system, so I got a bunch of them from Wildcat all at the same time. I had to get a laundry basket and take it to get everything because it was going to break my little canvas, grocery shopping bags that I usually use.
Right.
And so I had this mountain of witch comics to be hanging out with me for the last couple weeks. Fantastic. Cannot recommend enough. The one that I just finished was The Hidden Witch by Molly Ostertag. It's
nice.
The second in the Witch Boy series. And honestly, I liked it better than the first one. I don't know if it's just she's getting better as a writer and artist as she goes, which would make sense, or if it's just me. I just happen to like the plot of the second one better. But I gobbled this up in one sitting, and it is so perfect for the season too. It's set in October. So in this one, Charlie, Astor's friend, that goes to normal school, who's not a witch, gets cursed, and they have to figure out who's doing it, what's going on. And I really don't want to say more than that because I'm afraid I'll spoil it for folks.
Mm-hmm.
But it involves new characters that I really liked and really appreciated the story arcs and growth and development that all the characters have in this. And Astor is also helping his grandmother to try and save the old man, witch whose name is escaping me. I always want to say me. I don't know. Anyway, that is a monster creature, and he's trying to bring him back to humanity and stuff. And it's this big conflict because obviously he hurt him really badly, and why would he want to save him? But of course he's the only one who can, because that's how YA works.
Of course.
So good. And the next one in the series is The Midwinter Witch, which I'm this is my December read. We just have these all lined up, seasonally appropriate. I need her to then come out with a St. Patrick's Day and Easter. We'll just read these for every year.
Yeah, equinoxes, spring solstice, or summer solstices. Honestly, this feels like a natural progression and continuation of this series. I've got to imagine that's what she's got going in her head.
The thing, though, is these are all happening sequentially one after another, so it isn't even forced. It makes sense,
right,
that this is set in October, and then the one following this, as it linearly progresses in time, as these characters continue on with their lives, it makes sense when it's happening towards Christmas. I'm amazing, genius. 10 out of 10 recommend.
Yeah, I've heard this Witch Boy series is fantastic. I think there's a couple of people on our Discord that have read them. and said that it was just incredible. I think this needs to be on my list. I should do exactly what you're doing and get them from the library because they look really nice. And like, I know that Scholastic says they're like aimed at ages 8 to 12, but sometimes we just need a nice, easy book. And I feel like this stuff totally works.
Here's the thing. A good story is a good story. It doesn't matter if it's written age appropriate for a 4-year-old or a 40-year-old. A good story is a good story. Right. So that's where I'm at with these. But I will say the thing about YA and me in the pandemic is that things work out typically. Like bad things can happen, but they aren't doom and gloom and depressing. It's not like Jeff Lemire coming in to rip out your shriveled heart, like what remains of your hope for humanity. Sometimes the world is terrible and you've been listening to a Science Friday piece all about how the planet is doomed, and you just need a young person figuring out who they are and like really embracing life as your story. And that's I've read so much middle grade fiction during the pandemic, like way more than I ever have, except when I was actually in middle school. So probably more than that, because I didn't read much then. I like my mom when I was in middle school gave me access to like her science fiction bookshelves of like Lord of the Rings and Dune and stuff, and it was over from there. So how about you guys?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like I'm gonna have to take this Hidden Witch book, and I've just gotta read all of them. Like, no excuse. It's the perfect time of year.
You gotta,
what about you, Kait Lamphere? How have you been? How have comic books been?
I've been great. I hit my 200 book reading goal in Goodreads recently.
Whoa. Clap, 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 confetti cannons. I saw that and was like, smash that like button.
I have to thank manga for that. You know, I read manga before bed, and you know, it doesn't put me to sleep. It keeps me up. But and speaking of YA witchy reads, I read the book called Witchy, Volume 1. This is by Aria Slamet Rees. And in this world, the power of a person's magic is determined by the length of their hair. But like, if their hair is too long, they could be executed by the kingdom for being a threat? Question mark.
I hate when that happens. I hate when that happens.
I love that idea so much.
And Nynaeve, the main character, tries to hide her very long hair length as much as she can, but of course she's aging. She's starting to basically graduate what is their high school, looking toward her future and if she's going to have a career in magic, but she can't hide her hair forever. I mean, you know. So during Volume 1, I don't really want to get into what happens because you find all of the information I just gave you. You find that out in the first couple of pages, and then the story just kind of blasts off from there. And it's such a good journey. Like, she actually does take a physical journey, which I love in my books. And she makes new friends, including a talking raven. She learns about revolutionaries. She has this really nice, not perfect relationship with her mom, which is nice to read. And it's realistic to be like a healthy relationship that a teenage girl would have with her mother. And the reason that I am so into this book, other than all of the things that I just said, is because like the hair, the fashions, and even the text design in this book are fantastic and original. And the society is clan-based, which is pretty unique. And I don't know, there's just so much world building. And you've only touched on like a surface level of it, but you can tell that the creator has really thought like everything through, all of your secondary characters, all of your settings. And this Volume 1 ends on a cliffhanger in multiple storylines, but I was doing some research and I'm like, this better be a Volume 1 of like 5. And it turns out this is a webcomic. So there's way more online.
Hell yeah.
Nice.
Hell yeah. I just borrowed the first volume on Comixology Unlimited, but now that I know that it's a webcomic, I know what I'm doing with my free time this next week. This sounds like the most insane comic book concept. I love it so much.
Yeah, this is Witchy Volume 1 again, and I found it actually in Hoopla. So if you've got Hoopla, that was a really nice way to just read this real quick. Downloaded it for my weekend trip and read it in like 2 sittings. So
hell yeah, that sounds amazing. I'm definitely interested. But for me, this past week, I read a bunch of stuff. Particularly, I've somehow gotten into a groove where on Wednesdays I'm actually reading all of my comics that came out that week, and I feel
fuck?
I know I feel pretty accomplished about it. I mean, I know I'm jinxing myself by saying that on the show, but I do feel really cool about it. So one of the books that I read this week was Soul Plumber #1. This is my pick from last week, which is it's the Last Podcast on the Left guys wrote a comic book. It's Marcus Parks, Henry Zebrowski, and Ben Kissel as writers, with Tom McCrea on art. Honestly, I was surprised by how much I liked this book. I thought it was kind of going to be like, these guys have never written comics as far as I know, and they're kind of just getting dumped into this thing. But I'm like, how the hell does DC publish these guys? Like, I'm running like a million questions in one. Like, how do you go from big podcaster to writing comic books for a major, like one of the two major publishers? And something about this book clicked for me as I was reading it to say, like, this feels a lot like a 90s book modernized in terms of like the way that it's written, but there's like a grittiness to it that kind of reminds me like of Preacher, but it's not as ridiculously offensive unless you're unless you're a religious person who loves televangelized preachers. But yeah, honestly, I'm really surprised that DC published this, because it just doesn't feel like anything else that's coming out from them. And usually we say that in like a really good way, but I'm saying that in a I don't know why they published this. I'm very, very confused, but nonetheless, I really like it. It doesn't feel like any other Black Label book, because it's not a superhero based book. It's paranormal, and the book focuses on like kind of pointing out the hypocrisy of some religious folks in the United States, particularly in the South. Kind of the overzealous follower type character that becomes the focus of the book ends up with this, demonic moment where he runs into demons and he's helping kill bad guys and stuff. But a lot of really bizarre characters, and I feel like I can feel the voices of the Last Podcast on the Left guys in this book. But ultimately, I really, really liked it, and I look forward to it. And I'm just so surprised that DC of all publishers published this. Like, I would expect this from Fantagraphics, I would expect this from Image, I would expect this from honestly, I would expect this from Vertigo if it was still around. But because Vertigo's not around anymore, and Black Label is kind of like, this is DC, but everybody says fuck. Like, I just don't feel like this book clicks, but it's coming out and it's being published, so I don't know why I'm complaining. It just, something feels weird about it. So I'm really excited to see where this book goes. And I don't know, if you're into paranormal, sarcastic type comics, I think you'd like this. But ultimately, I don't know who to recommend this to. But I really like it. And I think it's just my bias of liking that podcast. Yeah. So the other thing that I want to talk about is Die number 1 through 20. I sat down and read the whole series because it's finished. This is Kieran Gillen.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Kieran Gillen, Stephanie Hans. I mean, like, I just wanted to get this story finished. I wanted to read it to say that I've read it so that I can reflect on it and I can do a reread, because I think that this book warrants a bigger reread where you sit down, you process the arcs, you read all of the back matter, you do all the things. I was focused on just getting through the book. And I got to a point yesterday when I was wrapping it up where I was like, oh man, this is where I dropped off. And that I realized that I dropped off right at the point where the book kind of started to say the conclusion is coming, whether you like it or not. And I was really, I don't know, I felt like the book was rushed, but in the same way that if you're playing a D&D game and you know the end is coming, the players and the GM, or any tabletop RPG game really, where you know the end is there, you know who the big bad thing is, or you know what the final arc of the story is going to be. So things can feel rushed if you're not in the moment playing, but from an outsider, or when you explain it to somebody, they're like, oh, you did all that in 2 sessions? You're like, yeah, it seems fast, but in the moment it wasn't. So reading this story where like the last arc kind of creeps up on you really, really fast, I felt a little bit off put by it, but upon reflection on it, I'm like, no, this totally works. I don't know. And again, I don't know if this book was rushed, or if it, like, Gillen and Hans just wanted to end it, or if, Kieran Gillen had planned this from beginning to end. Ultimately, I really liked the way that the book ended. I was really impressed by the way the core of the story that I kind of saw from upon my second read, or like start of the first arc, kind of saw where that story was going. I liked the way that Gillen concluded it all. I liked the way that he explored the topic that I think all of us who play tabletop RPGs, we say we want to do, and maybe we don't do enough, which is explore new things with the characters that we want to play, and try out personalities, or try out, different things about who you are in a game in a safe space among friends before you actually either adopt that about yourself or you decide that it's not for you. And I realize there's probably a lot you could read into what I'm saying, but I'm intentionally not trying to give away a lot of the core details of the book. But nonetheless, like I was really impressed by the way that they signed off the book. Hans and Gillen, just the way they just made it all work. And that being said, I will say, if you thought Stephanie Hans's art was good in the first couple of arcs of this, or the first few issues, you have no fucking clue what she's capable of, because the last probably arc and a half of this book has some of the most beautiful comic book fantasy art I've ever seen, to the point where I don't know why the last few issues of this book weren't just 80 pages long of just massive double page spreads, because there were a lot of like third page spreads where like you could see that if they wanted to, they could have turned that into a full 2-page spread over and over and over. And I'm glad that they didn't, because, you know, the books would have cost more and all that. But man, I just, when I thought Hans's art couldn't get better, she impresses over and over and over and over in the last arc. Yeah, highly recommended. I don't know if you guys got that yet, but
No,
I really
like,
love it.
This is one of the things, like, I already read volume 1, but I haven't read volume 2. So now that it's like out and finished, I need to reread volume 1 and then read volume 2 all like back to back. This needs to
Binge
be an
it.
afternoon. Yeah.
Highly recommend it. It's a great bingeable book. And I can't wait to play the Die RPG when it officially comes out. And like, I don't know, I'm trying to scrounge up an idea of like, what can we do as I read comic books to do that, because I think that would be really
that'd
fun.
Be fun, yeah.
Nonetheless, it was amazing, and I highly recommend it. So yeah, had a good time reading that. Let's move on, though. Let's talk about comic books that are coming out very soon and comic books that we plan to read very soon. I got to ask this new question. What's on the top of your pile? Let's start with you, Kait Scotchless.
Top of my pile is not a new book, but it's a new to me book, in that this is the time of year, October 1st, I rewatch Over the Garden Wall. There are those out there, and they are wrong, that say that Over the Garden Wall is a November show, that you rewatch November 1st, and that's incorrect. So I have started my Over the Garden Wall rewatch, which reminds me that, oh, that's right, there is comics for this show. There's actually a lot of comics for like many, many volumes, and I haven't read none of them. Maybe they're terrible. Media tie-in comics often are, but Over the Garden Wall Volume 1 is available on Hoopla for free, and I checked it out because I just need more of this in my life. And the thing with this show, though, I will say, even more so than other media tie-in comics, is so much of what makes Over the Garden Wall, the TV miniseries, incredible is the art. And it is not the same artists that do the book. And so I'm not sure how well it will translate. But we'll find out. So the volume 1 is 4 comics that are done by 2 different creator sets. So the first one is Jim Campbell, who is the writer and artist on an arc following Greg, the younger brother, and Jason Funderburger, his frog, as they traverse the unknown and quote unquote find new friends along the way, right?
That last name is messing with my brain. I love it
so much. And at the same time, the woodsman's daughter, Anna, is also wandering in the unknown after her father is tricked by the beast. So then the next story in this is by Amalia Lavari, the writing, and Kara McGee on art, where Anna then learns to survive on her own as she starts her journey to save her father before his fate is sealed in the Steel with the Beast. So I like that it's not like 2 totally isolated stories, that it sounds like one is leading well into the other, but I'll report back. I really don't have any idea how good or bad these comics are, but I have hopes, and mostly just a deep, deep love for this TV series. How about you guys?
Yeah, I've heard very, very good things about that TV show. So
Excuse me, have you not seen it?
I have not seen it. No,
Michael.
Listen, hey, I only have so much time in my life.
Good. Okay, but
it's mostly comics. Okay,
hear me out. It's 10, 11-minute long episodes. It's great for taking a coffee break. It's great for sitting and watching all in one go because it's less than 2 hours. It is the perfect, and I mean the perfect, October show. It is all of the vibes that you want. So please check this out. It is on Hulu, so you can access it there. It is also on HBO Max if you have that.
I was gonna say, if it's a Cartoon Network show, it's probably there. All right, you sold me. You've got me.
Thank you. I will be checking back on this.
I know you. You know, and I want.
Didn't someone just say he has an entire week off? I think I heard someone say that.
Listen, all right, you don't get to tell me what to do with my birth week, okay? Kait Lamphere, what are you excited for? What's on the top of your pile?
This is a volume called Spectre Inspectors, and it's the collected edition of...
What? Hold on, you made this up. Go ahead, sorry.
This is the collected volume of what I think is a 5-issue series from Boom Studios. The writer is Bowen McCurdy, and the artist is Caitlin Musto. And this is about a team of young ghost hunters who are internet famous, and they set out to explore America's most haunted towns and to prove ghosts are real, specifically real. It does not say if they are real in the description. And I trust Boom. The art is very cute, and this is seasonal, as Kait likes to read seasonal reads. I also like a seasonal read. So this is just perfect. I'm going to have to pick this one up.
Sorry, the title for some reason really tickles me, but it looks really cool. It looks like what I would expect a Boom book to look like, but it feels like
Spectre Inspectors too. If you're like, who would publish something about that title? I'm like, this is either manga or it's Boom Studios.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels a lot like Gravity Falls for some reason.
Oh yeah,
even though I know that's maybe not true, but like that's the look of it that I'm getting. But that looks cool. Looks very cool. You guys are on it. I don't understand it. Like, I am totally not the type of person that like reads seasonal books. I'm like, I've got a list of comics I need to go through, and I just read things. And if it happens to line up with the time of the year, that's great. But I don't usually like seek that stuff out.
I only do for like fall and a little around the holidays, but mostly just fall.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I like this time of year a lot, but like, I don't know. I never try to cater my reads around that kind of stuff. Anyways, totally off topic. I maybe we'll talk about it a little bit more after the break and when we get into the focus of the episode this week. But I do want to say we had some folks hanging out with us on Discord who are wonderful human beings, and we can't thank them enough. So the folks that I asked them what's on the top of their pile, and Hugh said that they're excited for May's book number 2. Hannah said they're excited, or they're reading Wonder Woman Black and Gold. Danny said Batman the Imposter, because Batman, of course. And Nick said a couple of books, and I'm not going to let him get away with that. So I'm picking one. He said Unbelievable Unteens. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. But regardless, my pick for this week, or I guess the book that's on the top of my pile, is Nighthunters, the collected edition. This is by Dave Baker and Alexis Zirit. Dave's been on the show a handful of times. I think Dave was on the show to promote Nighthunters when it was a Kickstarter campaign. That's been published, and now it's being collected. And I'm really, really excited to get my hands on this book. If you've never seen Alexis Zirit's art, I highly recommend you check out anything that he's done. It is unbelievable, the work that this guy is able to do with just the color black, let alone the color work that he does that is very neon and orange and yellow and green and purple and pink. It's really impressive, and it's a style that I really, really enjoy. It's very cyberpunky, very leaning into like just the insanity of, I don't know, I want to say like 80s and 90s neon work. I don't know how else to describe it, but Nighthunters is a story that's like a cyberpunk future that takes place in Venezuela, if I'm not mistaken, where kind of the world is falling apart, and it follows some characters who live in that world. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. These two creators are fantastic. I'm just going to pick this book up because I love them. But at the same time, the story sounds fantastic. And so if you can, make sure to go check out Nighthunters because it looks absolutely gorgeous. And yeah, I think from here, we're going to take a quick break. And before we get into that, I should say during the break, you're going to hear an interview that I did with Phillip Maira for his Kickstarter Crackle Volume 3, which is live on Kickstarter right now. If I'm not mistaken, he's got a super deal going on where you can pick up the first 2 volumes of his anthology series that he did, Crackle. I have to say, before we get into that, this is probably some of the most impressive work I've ever seen from a Kickstarter, and I've backed a ton of stuff. Phil did a great job, and his collaborators, numerous collaborators that he's had, are stupendous. And if you want to ever read something that is written by somebody who knows how to write a single page story or a 2-page story, Crackle is a perfect example. I highly recommend it. And you're going to hear me scream and yell about that a little bit in our chat, but nonetheless, Phil Maira, and after the interview, we'll be back for the regular episode. So we'll be back in just a second. Today on I Read Comic Books, I am talking to the one and only Phillip Maira, creator of the Crackle anthology series. Volume 3 of Crackle is on Kickstarter live right now. You can check it out in the link. There's a link in the show notes, so make sure you go do that. Phil, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm very excited to talk to you today.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Yeah, this is going to be fun.
Yeah, man. I guess to get things started, for the folks at home that maybe don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into comics?
Yeah, we'll just go right into the origin story, I suppose.
Please.
So, classic comic book fashion. So, yes, my name's Phillip Maira. I got into comic books at a relatively older part of my life. I didn't grow up with comic books, really. I mean, like anyone that was like a 90s baby. I watched the cartoons, the X-Men cartoons, the Spider-Man cartoons, was in love with the terrible CGI Spawn movie. But that was pretty much the limitation of it. It was just, kind of like the generation nowadays is it's more front facing from the media than it is the actual source material.
Sure.
But the thing is, like, I don't know if we really had comic book stores around us. I got into comics, I would say like mid high school or so. That's when like Sin City started coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And a buddy of mine had, I think he had The Yellow Bastard. He had one of the Sin City books. And so I read it and I was like, oh, this is interesting. I mean, I knew that it was very different from the X-Men that I had growing up, but it was more, the visuals and the arts and the storytelling, but I just kind of threw that in the back of my mind. But it was years later, it was about like 4 or 5, 6 years later, when I was going into my senior year of college, and I saw the same guy again, just so happenstance. And I went back to his place and I'm nosy. So
Mm-hmm.
he had The Walking Dead, the first trade, just like sitting in his living room. So I picked it up and started flipping through it. And like most probably people who listen to this, once you see a book, or especially a comic book, you zone out.
Right.
You're just there and you forget there's other people around you, that music's blaring right behind your head. And yeah, so I was reading that until they told us that we had to go. I forget, I think we had like a concert or something like that.
Something that was far less important than the comic book, obviously.
Yeah, how dare they? But yeah, and then I was like, all right, well, maybe I should start getting in this comics thing again. And this, for reference, this would have been, I think it would have been the summer of 2010. Yeah, summer 2010. So like the Walking Dead TV show was announced, but it hasn't premiered yet. I was going to premiere that October.
Okay.
So I was like, all right, well, maybe I should get into comics again. And at the time, I was my college job was working at the library. So worked at the library. I was there for almost 4 years at that point, and I knew the librarians. So I had all these resources next to me, and like all these my fellow workers. And so I did the next logical thing is I totally ignored them, and I went to google.com and I looked up like the 10 best graphic novels. So I totally ignored all the resources around me. But in college we had a great interlibrary loan system, so whatever I was able to find online, I was able to get it delivered to the library, or it was right there, and I would just read on my shift.
Right.
But when I started diving into it, it was the Vertigos. I didn't backtrack to any of the Marvel DCs. I was more interested in the finite complete stories, because that's what I've always been an avid reader. So I was going into, like I said, the suggestions were like, well, 100 Bullets kind of just ended around then. Why the Last Man ended. I was going through Sandman's naturally. And then I was just following writers. I'm like, all right, like this Grant Morrison person seems really interesting. So I started following their work a lot. I started reading more Neil. Obviously that leads to Alan Moore and all the rest of the UK boom that was happening, that happened about 15 years before that. And then just spirals from there. And then you just, since I had access to a library, and I should say this is jumping around a bit, but then when I graduated, went to my local library, and I just was And I was lucky enough, I'm from the Chicagoland area, and we have a phenomenal interlibrary system, even just between the libraries around the region. And so you can get most of what you want. They even have Kickstarter books.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I remember getting, it's not Jason Brubaker. It's Jason Brubaker. I was getting him and Ed Brubaker mixed up, and they're completely different. But like Jason Brubaker's like Sithra series, you can get that through the Chicago Interlibrary Loan System.
Nice.
I was like, all right, well, I don't want to go the superhero route because that doesn't interest me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what else is out there? And so then I started following publishers. I started looking at Fantagraphics. I started looking at Top Shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And I just keep spiraling from there. Not spiraling, but it is. You're just like, you're addicting, and you just keep you keep going. You keep just looking at whatever's on the shelves, and it gets to a certain point where you're like, all right, I'm reading all this stuff. I'm reading just purely indies. Like I'm going like in Chicago, a lot of the indie people know Cake's a huge thing, the Chicago Alternative Comics Expo. And I would go to that. I would go to that every year, and I go to C2E2, which is the more, I guess, commercialized version of the comic scene. I'd always have a better experience at Cake. As much as I go to C2E2 and just hang out in the artist alley and, get the comics purely from the creators and get all the indie comics, it was Cake that had the more storytelling and the visual art styles that more appealed to me. It's hard to describe, but you get this feeling that like maybe I want to try this out. Like I was attested to, like, if you're obsessed with baseball and you do fantasy baseball with your friends and you're just constantly watching it, you're going to get to the point where you're like, all right, well, I'm going to see if there's like a summer league of softball around my area, or like try to get some of my friends to do a softball league with me. And it's one of those, it's the same ideology as if you just kind of, there's a reason why you enjoy something and you kind of want to participate and actually learn more about the inner workings of that hobby of yours. And you want to just, you want to be more connected to it. And usually the best way to be connected to something that you're interested in is by physically doing it.
Right.
Whether it be, like I said, playing softball or learning a new like musical instrument or some type of carpentry or woodworking or just anything. Mm-hmm. So at that point I was like, yeah, it'd be interesting if I tried writing a short story comic. This would have been about 4 years from today, or around this time. So I ended up trying to take a loose idea that I had about a young mother who goes back to her parents' house for Christmas and she doesn't know where her husband is. I took that concept and I just, at first I was formulaic about it. I was like, all right, well, I'll do it 3-page. It'll be 3-page story. Page 1, beginning. Page 2, the middle, and then page 3, the end. And I was just like, so I did that, but I ended up building into a 5-page script because things naturally grow, and I shouldn't think of it as a math problem. It's storytelling.
Right.
So I wrote the script, and it took me a while. It took me like 2.5 months to do. After that, I was like, all right, well, I'm going to try to write another script just to see if I can do that. And the great thing is, I mean, even at this point, there's professional there's resources to get professional scripts. I think Comics Experience has a repository of professional scripts of stories that I had on my shelf that I can just reference. I remember there's Michael Carey had one of his scripts from Lucifer, and I love Michael Carey. Mm-hmm. So I was able to just do a one-on-one comparison, like, all right, what actually made it to the page, and just the dialogue between artists. I mean, for that project and a lot of the other projects, the art team's already locked in, but it's just that to see the communication that goes back and forth and what needs to be added, and just thinking of like the colorists and thinking of the letter, it was just very eye-opening to see the scope of what a script should be and how to communicate with. So that was extremely helpful. And then from there, like I was mentioning, I tried writing another script, and that took me roughly the same amount of time, 2.5 months.
Mm-hmm.
And this was just side hobbies, things I would do whenever it struck my mind. It wasn't anything I was actively pursuing.
Sure.
But after the 2 scripts, I was like, all right, well, this is step 1.
Right.
Step 2 is actually communicating and finding artists. From there, I was very fortunate. This was, like I said, this was roughly 4 years ago. So around the time I had the 2 completed scripts, I was looking at different forums. I was looking at the comic book collab subreddit. I was looking at a couple forums I can't even remember off the top of my head that were basically just job posting sites for comic art, for comic artists, for paid gigs. I got lucky, like I said, because it was Inktober was right around the time when I finished my 2nd script.
Oh, gotcha.
So when I started, I was like, all right, well, there's all these phenomenal, beyond talented artists that are posting like simple sketches, but you can tell the storytelling's there. And it's coming from all across the world instantaneously. Like I just refresh Instagram or Twitter and I set the search to latest, and there's constantly new art. I eventually got smart enough to figure that I can put keywords in there like comic or comic artist that are in their bio, so I can narrow it down, so I can see these. If I like someone's like simple illustration that they did for the day, I can then go look at their profile and look at their portfolio and actually see if they have comic work and if that's something that they're interested in. That's kind of what happened. So I saw someone's work that I liked, and I messaged her and I said, I have 2 scripts and I think you'd be great for one of them. This is the first time I've ever done like a comic before. She's like, I haven't done a comic in a couple of years, but let's go for it. So Hannah Wenzel and I, she's a German artist, and yeah, we kind of learned together. She, like I said, she had more experience and she's done other client work, but it was just an experience of just constant communication and just me saying like, I trust you. I trust your vision. Like, I may be new at this, but I also know that the best way the story will hit its to be like peak perfection and give the best experience for the reader is if we both communicate and work together, like a true collaboration.
Right.
It's not, and I was very, very cognizant of it very early on, of even writing my initial scripts, was that like, and I still feel this way very, very strongly. And I try to talk about it as much as I can to starting up writers, is that like the script is not the end all be all. The script should just be step 1. I always say the script is a blueprint. We use this, and this is something we can discuss of what works, what doesn't work. I don't have this hubris or this ego. Like if I need to change, if you think that the dialogue is too much or a scene doesn't work, or if any little thing, like then we'll change the script and we'll change the storytelling. All that really matters is when everything's complete and done, that the person reading it, their jaw's on the ground because they're in love with the story so much and the characters and the visuals, and they're hooked. And then they get angry at the end because everything's a short story and it's not really
so
that long.
You're basically describing my experience reading through volumes 1 and 2 of this series, which I appreciate you sending over for me to check out. Because like every single one of the stories, I think it's a testament to the work that you've done so far in collaborating with these various creators. I guess like to tell the folks at home a little bit about this series, Crackle, like it's you with a bunch of different artists and letterers and colorists and stuff putting various short stories together, and I found every single, like each of the volumes extremely profound and extremely unique. I mean, I don't mean to like just sit here and throw compliments at you the entire time here, but like I could tell that the passion was there in every single story. Like I can't tell you the number of anthologies that I've read where some of the stories just fall flat. Like of a book of 12 stories, like maybe 8 of them work. I think for the stories that you've compiled inside of the Crackle books, like every single one of them work. in their own different way. And it's really interesting, if only because hearing you talk about your creative process here really sets the context for like, oh, that's how you make this work. It's not a matter of I'm the writer, you're the artist, and like drawing this big line. You're treating it as collaboration. I think that's fantastic to hear. I think, maybe a lot of people out there listening understand that that's how it should be or whatever, but to hear you talk about it, it's really fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, just for more like tips for like young artists, young as far as like they're in their creative career, I always say like, even like, how to describe this? So my creative process might be a little bit different, is that I write the script first, and then I initially either contact one of the artists that I previously have collaborated with, that I think would be visually best and their storytelling abilities would work perfect for it. Or I've been super, super fortunate where I've just done Twitter posts and I'm like, it's paid. This is a paid gig. Here's the deadline. Usually I'm very, for the Crackle books, I prepare ahead of time. So it's usually a very long deadline of like, hey, this needs to be done in 5 months. It's only 9 pages. It's nothing crazy. But like paid gig.
That's amazing. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm trying to give as much leeway. I know people's time is it's very important.
Yeah.
But also, like I said, just plan ahead in case there's another commission work or project that is more demanding, that has a tighter deadline, or the client is less forgiving. But yeah, the last 3 stories that I've done have been that, and I've had a link to the script, so any artist that would be interested can actually see the full story. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's just been beautiful. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, I've seen artists' portfolios, and they're all people from all over the world. And so, like I said, just give them pure creative freedom, and we just make things as enjoyable for the reader as it is for us to be as creators. Mm-hmm. I don't want to jump back, but as far as advice for writers, is I always tell my artists I collaborate with is like, experiment, break things, like combine things. If you think panels can be combined, if you think panels need to be split up, like whatever the storytelling is best. Like if you can, this is the part where we get to talk about comic panels and pages, but we have nothing to show for them because this is radio.
Right. But, listener, just visualize this, please.
So Crackle Volume 2 had, if you can remember, they had the story Clenching Fog, mm-hmm. that M. Dean, who's one of my favorite artists, and I can't believe I worked with her. So M. Dean did a couple experimental panels, or experimental whole pages. Like the first page, there's a portion of the opening page that's a flashback, and so it's like a 2x2 grid almost. So it's like so it's 4 panels. And each of those panels are a flashback, but then there's text that loops around. Like it's weird. It's like this flashback within like a visual flashback, and then a narrative flashback, and like the words circling around. So if you want, you can like physically turn the book or iPad, mm-hmm. and like I said, that's just a portion of the opening page, and then you go right into the story. And it's just like things like that. You only get that when you try to like, all right, well, what's a cool way we can do this and engage the reader more? And that's either to make them physically, turn the book so they can read, or just for them to like I said, there's a flashback almost like contextualized in the narrative and visual form, mm-hmm. so that readers more engaged because they're using a brain a little bit more because it's an unconventional type of way, especially in the comic medium. Yeah. But yeah, it's like that. You only get that when you're like, all right, let's try something different. It's just
absolutely. I mean, that story in particular, I learned to read upside down because rotating my iPad was being annoying. But still, that kind of brings me to one of the questions I was thinking about, which is, you've gotten throughout both of the volumes, and I was fortunate enough to see a preview of volume 3. You've got creators and artists of all different kinds. I mean, how do you wrangle all of these people to make this book happen? You kind of said it before of just planning ahead and making sure that you've got like a really long schedule to make it happen. But I mean, jumping from style to style to style, how do you pick which creator, which artist you're going to collaborate with for the stories that you've written?
I mean, yeah, like I said, I've been, as you mentioned, it's the allotting enough time. So if it is an artist that if I see their portfolio and I think they match well, I plan far ahead in case that person cannot begin working on the project for another 2 months or so because of previous commitments.
Right.
So there's that, so that means it sounds huge. It's not, now this makes me sound like a jerk, but yeah, I get the artists that I want in my free time because if I think someone's perfect for a story, I usually get them because like I give enough time and and I have a script, so they're not waiting for it. But yeah, it's, I don't know. It's just a very fortunate, like I said, it's like you can always just say it's like the domino and snowball thing where I started collaborating with artists and that in turn, like then those artists share the work as well as I share the work whenever it's done or there's works in progress like whips, and everyone shows whatever they show their progress of the story, and then that points me to other artists. I went in, I was looking at Hannah and I were working on our second project together. On the suggestion bar, I said, like, people you might like. And my social media is only artists. I don't follow musicians or celebrities or anything. Mm-hmm. So I'm just constantly art suggestions
right.
and fantastic artists. So I was looking at Hannah's profile. It was someone that they mutually follow each other. It was an artist named Zorka Gaeta. She has a Greek last name. I can never pronounce her correctly. But so it was Zorka. I'm like, huh. And like I just finished the script 2 days ago, and I'm looking for an artist, and her work is perfect. And so I contact Zorka, and it's like I said, it's a cold email. It's like, hey, I found not hey, but hello. I found your profile and portfolio through Hannah. Like, here's the script. Please, this is another thing for newer writers. Whenever cold emailing, just there's certain things that you need to put in the emails. Just like usually I always put how I found that artist, so that artist knows how they're being seen, which is, you put so much art and put so much work out there, you don't know who's viewing it or how they're experiencing it.
Yeah.
So I message usually how I found their art initially. I always ask at that point, it's like, here's the script. Let me know what you think about it. What is your page rates? Because you always pay your artist. I say this all the time, like, pay your artist. Don't give them any of that BS. We'll give you a large portion of the back end, because the back end's not going to be anything. We're in indie comics.
Right.
The people need to eat. You need to pay your artists. And then obviously what's your availability and your schedule. And then the rest of the emails, usually a whole bunch of comments of why I like their art so much. But yeah, I think that's just the basics of how to communicate. And I mean, there really isn't a rhyme or reason. It's just keep following the artists that you like. They're going to share the artists that they enjoy, and look at the projects that the artists that you enjoy in indie comics, see what either anthologies they've been part of or similar enough, which podcasts that they've been a part of. But yeah, like, it's just one of those things. I mean, there is no formula. You just have to just be the best collaborators you can and just put ego aside and just think, all right, well, what's going to excite the reader? But also, what kind of makes sense? You just don't want, I kind of talked about this earlier about, kind of keeping the reader more engaged. As a writer, like, all right, how do I keep the reader engaged? All right, let's just add like 10 more text boxes. Like, just throw up, there's just so much dialogue. That'll keep the person on the page and engaged. and it doesn't. It zones you out. As the writer, I mean, you're thinking about your part. If that's your sole, if that's your sole skill, you're just thinking about your part, and you got to be just like I wrote the first draft. Can I cut dialogue? Can something be explained or visually shown to the reader that I don't need the person just saying this?
Right.
It almost seems like I'm just trying to talk to my younger self in the past, like this 4-year journey that I've been in. And that's kind of, to circle back to everything, that's kind of what Crackle is. So every issue of Crackle is about 1 year to about 16, 18 months worth of stories that I've written in that chunk of time. And then when I feel that it's at a succinct point, and then I just wrap it up and put it, and then have a cover on it. But in this third one, I feel like I'm finally getting to a great creative point where I have all these collaborators, the people that I've been creating stories with for years, and we just keep building something special.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is incredible. I have so many more questions for you. So I think, Phil, we have to have you come back to talk more, because I'm really curious to know about, a lot of the themes in your stories are very, like, everything's pretty much focused on real world for the most part. I'm really curious to know about, there's this constant circling around, like, discussions of death and heartbreak and things like that. I don't know if you have a quick answer for, like, why a lot of your stories tend to be about that, or is it just something like you feel like you need to get off your chest, or something else?
I don't know. Yeah, most of my stories the stories within are kind of, I would say, slice of life, drama, and magical realism. It's a lot of people talking, but it's also a lot of action. It's kind of it's a weird balance for that. I really do not know the correct genre term for it.
I don't think I could put a hat on it like that.
But a lot of the times it has to deal with mortality, either the people's fear of mortality,
right?
The release, like, not the release of it, but just like the comfort of knowing your mortality. But it's also, but within that, it's also about a reflection on time. There's a whole, like I said, a lot of the panels and page structures are very unique, where we try to play with your perception of time as the reader, as you try to perceive of all, like, montage segments in unique ways. So you as the reader are perceiving time in a very unique way, but also that the characters themselves are perceiving time. I mean, full disclosure, I take a lot of my artistic cues from, like, Richard Linklater's movies. I should say the non-comedy movies of Richard Linklater, because he did, like, Bad News Bears and some of the other ones. His, like, serious dramas, like the Before series, has a huge impact on me, and that's a story of a man and a woman, and they meet in their early 20s, and serendipitously, and they spend, like, an evening together, and then 9 years later, the film the second film is filmed 9 years later, as the characters are 9 years older. So the characters and the story are set, or, time has progressed for everything.
Right.
And then 9 years after that it was another movie. So, like, it's just so far removed, and the actors have, obviously physically aged, and they're just different points in their lives. And then, I mean, the most famous one that he's done was Boyhood, which was the one it was filmed with it follows, like, a young boy. I don't know, let's just say he was like 7 years old or something, and then you follow him through 12 years of his actual life. Like, they filmed little chunks for every once, like a day or two and then a little bit every year in 1 year. And it's just like crazy thinking about that. And it was some of the narrative works, but just as a whole, just thinking about that, and you're watching these people grow up in real time ahead of you. But the trick of that movie is there's not like hard cuts that say, like, 1 year later, or, the main character Mason is now 10 years old. He has enough trust in the viewer that they know that, okay, now we're at a time jump, and this is something else. And then he trusts that you're intelligent enough to play catch up, and that you want to play catch up. I mean, that's one thing I always remember is that, people don't want to be talked down to. No one wants to be talked down to,
right?
Whether it be verbally or within any, like, in their art. But people want to jump up. They want to reach for something greater, and that's why I trust the readers. Like, I trust that they're anxious and they're adventurous, and they want to just figure it out themselves. And that's why I try to, as I've kind of alluded to, I cut the dialogue. I cut dialogue that I think that could be done visually, because I know the reader's smart enough. They can see. They're not just skipping through everything. They're actually taking time on the panels, and they're attached to the characters. And that's why it makes you. That's the working theory that I'm working on, is that the reader is more invested because they're putting in that extra effort. But I'm also, me and the artist, we trust that we're giving them a good enough world that they want to jump into, and that's the most challenging part. But once you get there, and once you create that world that people want to just spend their time with, that's the true beauty of it. And then you put these worlds out there, all these short stories and all these characters, and like I said, there's all these universes, and then you just let people enjoy them too. And then people have different interpretations that you don't even think of, and it's just so elating. It just makes you so happy as a creator that someone is coming up with these interpretations or these observations that you had no idea about. And that's just the beauty of creating stories.
Yeah. I mean, and I personally think, as someone who reads a lot of comic books, I think you definitely convey that. Like, it feels like you're not trying to spoon feed people with your stories. And I honestly, this conversation has been fantastic. I had so many other things to get to, but I'm so fascinated by everything that you said tonight. I guess I really hope that everybody gets a chance to go check this Kickstarter out. There's a link in the show notes. Search for Crackle Volume 3. You should be able to find it, but please go check it out. Real quick, before we wrap here, has there been any books, Phil, that you've read recently that you've absolutely loved?
I'm trying to think. And I'm going to look like a jerk.
It's okay.
Yeah, I just went to the comic shop today. I picked up my buddy Frankie White's 20 Fists. I've been wanting to read that for a while. I was trade waiting that. Source Point Press just came out with the trade. I just got the final issue of Layla Starr by Ram V, and I can't remember who his collaborator is. I guess the last one that really shook me, I mean, what would have been Ram V and Anand's, and Aditya did the letters, because Aditya did fantastic letters for that.
Yeah, that book's been solid.
Yeah, but off the top of my head, I talk about this all the time, but a lot of us read and consumed a lot of media within the last 18 months, because we had the time on our hands. So I was just constantly getting stuff from the library. I ended up getting A Map to the Sun by Sloane Lyon. And that's just such a gorgeous book. I started reading it like 10 o'clock at night, and I couldn't put it down. I just kept reading it. It's nice. It's like it's kind of like a coming of age basketball story in high school, but I just love Sloane's art. If you like that, she did Prism Stalker, and just recently she had a Kickstarter that was for like a short horror anthology. And I think it gained like $20,000. But nice. Like her as a creator, I just love her art, and everything's so vibrant. I think First Second published that book, but it's just, like I said, it's just all Sloane is the pure creator of that. And yeah, nice. I can't talk highly enough of that. If you have to, just, like I said, go to the library. I got mine from the library, and then I went to buy myself a copy. And then, speaking of this, I'm going to start buying my holiday. I buy books for everyone for the holidays.
Right.
So I'm gonna probably buy about 5 copies of that and give it to various cousins. So.
Nice. Well, I guess to wrap things up here, Phil, where can people find you on the internet if they want to talk to you more about your writing process or about Crackle or anything else?
Sure. I mean, I love talking about the writing process and creating process. So I'm very active on Twitter because that's more language, verbal. I'm on Instagram, but the only things I do on Instagram are just hype other people's books, with works in progress and pictures.
Right.
And that's about it. And you can always go to my website, phillipmaira.com. I always have some previews of stories or stories I'm working on. And then I've been trying to produce more for my mailing list so that way you get more of the personalized works in progress as soon as they get my inbox. I try to put in you guys' inboxes. But yeah, like I said, mostly Twitter if you want, I'm on there like 13 hours, 14 hours of the day. So that's probably the best.
Same here. I totally get that. Well, cool. Well, Phil, thank you so much. I good luck with the Kickstarter. Fingers crossed. Hope everything goes well for you guys. And like I said, check the show notes for everything like that. We're going to bounce back to the regular episode. But Phil, thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again, Mike.
This week on I Read Comic Books, we are talking about witchy comics. Witches in comics. The best, the worst, the weirdest witches. Witches, because, it's a seasonal thing. We're in the month of October. Let's get into witches. Kait Scotchless, this was your idea. So where do we go with it from here? Where do we go? Like, what do you want to talk about when it comes to witches?
So, first of all, the rationale was really just what's an excuse to read a bunch of witch comics, because witches are awesome. I love the idea of like having this ability, but it's also just not innate. It's not like you're Superman, right? It's like a thing you have to learn and practice and get better at. And like, you might not know that you're a witch. And then someone knocks on your door in the middle of a storm on an island is like, you're a wizard, Harry. This is the fantasy that I've had since I was small, and I like reading books about it. So the thing, though, is when you start thinking about it as comics, is like there are so many people with powers in comics that I would not consider a witch. So, like, what makes a character a witch versus just having powers? And, like, what characteristics are there? Like, does it count as a witch if you're something like Scarlet Witch, where you're not actually doing things with other witches, you're doing things with other superhumans? Or, like... There's also all sorts of different kinds of magic systems. Like Kait was talking about in the first half with the hair. That's insane. But there's also some that are just like real loosey-goosey, and others that are very rigid and spelled out and have, you need X, Y, and Z. And then also just like, man, I want to hear which books I should be reading. Well, just give me more. I just need more to go get and read this October.
Well, I mean, between you and Kait, I think we've got every single witch comic book ever written.
That can't be true.
That
can't be true. Kara is going to kill us because we don't have Sabrina on the sheet right now.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that's really interesting because I think going into this episode, I think I might have already said it. I didn't think that I had many comics in mind that I would be like, yeah, I've read a lot of stories about witches, but like, I really didn't think I did. And then I started to just list out the ones that I knew. And I was like, oh shit, I've actually read quite a few comics that feature witches. And I'm curious, like, cause a lot of the times when it comes to comics about witches, what I find the most interesting about them is that they aren't stuck in a specific genre. Right? Like you can be a witch in the Archie universe. You can be a witch in like a purely fantasy, fantastical world, or you can be like a witch that lives in the regular world.
Yeah.
The regular world that we live in, and I find it really fascinating, like the way that the idea of a witch in comics and witches in stories in general are just adaptable to pretty much anything. But like some of the books that I immediately thought of for this topic was like Witch Hat Atelier, I think is the #1 book. It's like one of my favorite manga ever. It's the prettiest, most exciting witch comic as far as I'm concerned. But I don't know, like Kait Lamphere, what was the first thing that came to your mind when you thought about this episode?
The first thing that came to my mind was actually Toil and Trouble by Marguerite Scott and Kelly Matthews.
Okay.
And that one's about, it's a retelling of Macbeth from the point of view of the witches. And it is a mix of new dialogue and dialogue from Macbeth, and then all of the witches have like a different nature-based design.
Cool.
And so this is like an undertaking to read. Like you really need to give it some extra time. It's not a fast read, but it is gorgeous and well done, and something that I will probably reread this season.
Interesting.
And then yeah, when Kait started asking your question about like what makes a witch and what are the interesting magic systems, I really had to think about what a witch is versus any other kind of magic user.
Right.
Immediately, I started thinking about how if you play Dungeons and Dragons, there are all these different like warlock, sorcerer, wizard, and all druid, just different ways that a character can get magic, like the source of their magic and how they use it and what it's used for. And I was like, okay, well, which one of these things is a witch?
Which witch is which?
Yeah, but I think that's, I don't know. I think that if you look at all of the different things that call themselves, or all of the different books that have the word witch in them, or whose characters call themselves witches, I don't think that it is that black and white, you know, as much as D&D tries to say that it is, just for the benefit of rules in a game. But I do feel like a witch is a character that has magic innately. Like it's not like, you know, Captain Marvel, who is given magic through an event, or I think Doctor Strange learns magic through like extreme study. I think that a witch is a person that is born with magic, and they can study and make it more powerful, but they just have it.
Yeah, there's some innate ability that other people don't have.
With the exception of Witch Hat Atelier, which is all about witches who learn magic through writing. But
it's true.
Maybe.
Yes.
But that's like the twist in that system, is that it turns out that like it's a lie that people can't do it.
Right.
I will say I did pick this up from the library when we were talking about what we were going to read and stuff. And I don't usually like manga, but I enjoyed this one.
That's all I'm looking for.
It is beautiful. The story and writing, I'm not as into it. Like I still wish the art is what I'm here for. The art is gorgeous.
For sure.
It reminded me of, what is it, The Girl from the Other Side, where I wasn't that into the story itself, but I was very into the art. And so it made it an enjoyable read. Also, it's one of those things where you're like, oh, that's what everyone was cosplaying. Like there's certain things that you see and you're like, oh, I've definitely seen this at Comic-Con.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like I did like your comment though about like the Kait Lamphere about, you know, this inherent thing, because I do think with the rare exception, you know, this idea of becoming a witch or being a witch is like it's an inherited thing. It's familial, or, you know, someone just exists and they have magic, or they learn that they have magic at like a young age in some capacity, which, you know, take that for what it is. Is it a metaphor for puberty? Is it you know, whatever? But I do like that. I feel like a lot of modern authors are taking that idea of what it is to be a witch and kind of twisting it a little bit and saying that it's not just a gendered thing, even though, you know, if you get in deep into like, I don't know, some stories like witches and warlocks are kind of at the same level. Yeah. It's like what's considered a wizard versus whatever. But I don't want to necessarily start to split hairs. But I do like that idea of just a innate magic user is someone who could be considered a witch. But like it's different when it comes to someone like Zatanna, who is using magic, or Constantine, who is using magic. I don't know if I would call them witches in the same capacity that I would say someone from like Ron in the Grey World. Maybe that's a bad example. I don't know if you guys have read that, but Mooncakes, for example, you know, where the character is born with this innate ability to use it, and she has mentors who teach her how to use the magic that she has. So
yeah,
I don't know. It's a really interesting thing, because I looking at different types of magic in different books, there is a few common threads, and I think most of that is like it's bloodline based, or, you know, someone gave you this power in some capacity. And you could look at even something like Witch Hat and say, like, you know, Kefri gave the main character her powers by teaching her how to do it, and I feel like there is an inheritance.
There's and that idea of like a coven, that it's not usually a solo. Even if they're now solo practicing, there's still an idea of some level of a society or group of people who have these same powers and are exchanging skills and ideas, or sometimes opposed to one another. But like, I really loved the comic, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. And that's like such a big part of it, is her aunts like teaching her the stuff and then getting exposed to this wider witch world, right? And that kind of, as Kait was pointing out, that like separation of to some degree from society in that sense, whether it's because they're hidden or looked down on, that's often a big part of it in the story, or like they're trying to hide their magic, like in Black Magic. Black Magic was the one I was so excited to reread. If you guys haven't checked out the Greg Rucka, Nicola Scott series, I think it's just the 3 volumes, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Oh my God. The most beautiful, beautiful art. And I love the way Nicola Scott uses color to show magic. Like everything's black and white and grayscale other than the magic.
Gosh.
And it just pops. Oh, it's so cool.
So cool. Yeah, Black Magic definitely was one of those books where I was like, shit, magic's really fucking cool, isn't it? Like,
yeah, like it's definitely urban fantasy, which usually I'm not that into. Like, I like it, but I don't love it the way I love some stuff. But this one got me. It was very good.
Yeah, I think that, like the premise of Black Magic being what it is, of like, a local cop who happens to be a witch. She gets called in when the really weird cases come in, and typically they have to do with magic.
Yeah,
and of course the
standard urban fantasy.
Exactly. But like Greg Rucka has a way of writing comics that I think really subverts some expectations, but also allows someone like Nicola Scott to really shine and say, like, we'll do like 3 or 4 pages in a row where there's no dialogue, and I'm just going to let you tell the story. Like, it's such a beautiful book for that reason.
He's so good at writing for a visual medium like that. Like, there's definitely writers that I really enjoy, but they are writers. They're definitely not writing for the art in the way that I feel like he usually is.
Yeah. I mean, I will say the one thing about a lot of Greg Rucka's books is the dude loves police procedurals. I think like there's a lot of book like Queen and Country, this one, the Gotham City PD, like
Queen and Country is great though.
Right. I know, I'm not saying that they're bad, but I think like he definitely has a genre that he really wants to do, but he does it so well that I can't be mad at him trying to do the same type of genre over and over. I mean, that would be like me getting mad at Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips for continuously doing crime books. Like, not mad about that. I read every single one of them. But yeah, like I think that, I mean, that's a perfect example of like a modern take on witches that works really, really well, feels super unique, even if it uses a lot of like tropes that I think we as readers probably are aware of when it comes to witches. Kait Lanfear, have you had a chance to read that book by chance? I don't mean to just keep rambling on about it.
Black Magic?
Yeah,
I think I've read it 3 times now.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
And I need to read the rest of them. I've only read volume 1 again and again and again.
Gotcha. I mean, even just that one volume is solid, so I understand that. Was there another book that you wanted us to dig through, I guess, Kait?
Which Kait?
Lanfear, sorry.
So one of the things I notice as a commonality whenever I read books that have witch characters is that they stand out from their society in some way that is not just because they have magic, And I think that Snapdragon by Kat Lay is a really good example of this. And so Snapdragon is the character's name. And there's a lot of subtle representation in this book that is like not addressed, but it is very like frequent in the book. And one of those things is that Snap's pronouns are she, but her gender expression is extremely neutral. Like I would have assumed that this person had at least some like agender, I don't know, self-expression at least. And there are also visual hints that her family doesn't have a lot of money. And that kind of sets her apart from the other people in town. And the plot of this book is that Snap needs help from the quote unquote scary town witch that everyone else is afraid of, but Snap is not afraid of the scary town witch. And then she ends up discovering things about herself and her family that I don't want to spoil, but I'm sure that you can tell what they are. And the magic system in this book is very familial and it's very nature centered. And, the nature centered part is something else that I kind of attach to witchcraft.
Yeah.
Yeah. having just read that book very recently, it's perfect example of like a witchy book that just feels right and really it manages to weave the magic of the characters into the story in a way that doesn't feel like this is a book about magic and we're going to over explain the magic. Because I mean, I've read books like that and it's never been fun. But that one totally manages to balance so many things in such an intelligent way. Like I really have to credit Cat Lay for their ability to just deliver such a wholesome, solid book that gets across a lot of really strong points, but also has a very interesting fantasy style. That I don't know, it's very low key, but at the same time, it's crucial to the story.
That's like part of where I was like, Witch Hat Atelier I liked, but I didn't love is like, there's definitely info dumpy parts about this is the details of how this magic system works. And I'm like, that level of detail is okay if you weave it in. Like, I don't feel like it's any more or less detailed than the Witch Boy series. It's just that in Witch Boy, you're learning it as Aster is learning it, right? And so it's like woven into the story versus just like this page is just an info dump page about here's the ingredients and here's the different things and here's the different inks and like that's the kind of the stuff where I'm just like meh. One I read recently that's another middle grade is The Okay Witch by Emma Steinkellner. And if you need sweet and heartwarming in witch, do this one. So again, it's inherited, right? But the context is like you're in New England and a girl essentially finds out that she's a witch and her mom's a witch, but her mom swore off witchcraft because it turns out mom was one of the like witches persecuted in Salem, and like they escaped to they got an alternate dimension kind of thing that they all went to, but mom was bored there and came back. So mom's actually hundreds of years old, and like it's so weird. And like so it's essentially becomes a story about being part human, part witch, where she was raised very human and is part of the human world and it's everything she knows, but also has discovered this other side of herself, the witchcraft, which of course emerges in puberty because she's just totally pubing out. And when that happens, you accidentally do magic.
Take a step back and scratch that phrase from ever being said ever again.
So it's very like Harry Potter style where like if you don't learn magic, you like do it on accident and you like not controlling it. So it is fun, and it is like her coming to understand herself and navigate these two identities that she has between her, and also that push-pull between grandma and mom on her of like one wants her to be all witch and one wants her to be all human, and she's not really either. And because it's middle grade, like it's not gonna hurt you. It's gonna feel good when you're done reading it. And like, does she make friends? And is there a talking cat? Yeah, obviously. Is it real cute? Obviously. Yes. So that kind of stuff I really like. The thing that I was thinking about when we were talking about this, like Scarlet Witch comes to mind because it's witch in the name, but Scarlet Witch to me never feels like a witch. Never feels like a witch. Yeah. What do you guys think about that?
There's rare stories where Scarlet Witch is actually doing witchy things, and I feel like, you know, if you watch the Marvel TV show, you know, the WandaVision.
Yeah, no, I haven't yet.
Without being too spoilery, or spoilery at all, like they touch on some witchy elements of the potential of the character.
Okay.
But like I can't think of. And again, I haven't read a lot of Scarlet Witch comics, so maybe I don't know. But I can't think of a lot of examples where like Scarlet Witch is going out and working with covens and stuff.
That's what I mean. It's like she feels like other X-Men in the sense of like having powers, and her powers come across just as like ability to cast spells, but it doesn't feel different to me. It doesn't feel like witch to me. And I think what part of that is so much is it's just her. Like she's not doing coven. She's not being perceived differently as a group than the other X-Men. Like it's yeah, her powers just feel like X-Men powers. They don't feel witchy to me at all.
Yeah, I mean they're hex powers. Danny in the chat called that out, and like, what does that even mean? The answer is it doesn't matter because she can change the entire reality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that her power is like more. Not, I don't want to say more because I think that witchcraft, as it is represented elsewhere, is very powerful. But I feel like Scarlet Witch's powers are very showy. and very like all encompassing. There's no like subtlety there. It doesn't.
We need to retcon this series. What's her power? It's to retcon.
Yeah, I think it's too big. It's not like this kind of, like I said I said earlier that I feel like witchcraft is very natural, and I feel like this kind of like in your face. I'm just gonna do this crazy shit.
Well, and that's part of it for me too, is like good magic systems have built-in limitations. Otherwise things stop being interesting. It's like the Superman problem of like, you're too powerful. Like things just stop making sense because you could just do XYZ. So
Paul's ears are burning somewhere right now.
I'm sorry, but I have, So like the whole like, sometimes the magic is limited by supplies because you need certain ingredients, or sometimes it's limited by the individual's power and it makes them tired or drained, and overdoing it harms you physically. Like there's different ways people limit their magic in some way, but it needs to be, to me, to be interesting, limited in some way like that, because when it gets like Scarlet Witch, it's just like, it becomes just riddled with plot holes because there's so many times where it's like, well, she could have just done blah, 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 you know?
Yeah. I mean, and, you know, Danny in the chat's pointing out about, you know, Wanda has trained with Agatha, who's a longtime baddie. I mean, like, again, there's no limit, there's no whatever, and I'm sure that there's, you know, some comic book folks out there probably would say like, well, she gets tired if she uses them too much. I mean, sure, right? Like I feel like Sabrina the Teenage Witch is also at the same level, where Sabrina's whole thing is like, well, I have this unlimited power, but also I shouldn't use it. Like she's been taught that like by
there's like moral limits. That's another way to limit your magic system, and like Witch Hat Atelier does that to an extent of like there's forbidden spells.
Well, and like your spell power is based upon like the ink that you use and the size of the paper and all this other stuff. But you know, it's interesting because you say like, oh, magic without limit is not interesting. It's when I think of one of the books that came up for discussion for today. One of the books that came to mind was Ron in the Grey World. And this is a story about a young girl who has these magical shoes that allowed her to turn into an older version of herself, like 18 or 19 years old, and she's like 10 years old, right? And it's kind of a goofy book, but the magic in the world is like ever flowing. It like everything that Ron runs into when she gets upset, like it just magic blooms, like flowers bloom around her, you know, buildings bend at will, and her mom is this magic keeper who is keeping the great darkness away at bay, and she has to sit on top of this huge door in this metaphysical realm. Like it's super abstract and crazy and stuff, but her mom is overflowing with magic constantly. She can make anything happen at will, but she's so whimsical and so just kind of, I don't want to say like flaky, but she's kind of just like overly confident and overly happy, and she's just very, I keep saying the word whimsical because it's the only word that I can think of, but just free flowing with like happy thought and like good times, and anything that she wants to do can happen, and it's almost scary to see someone with that level of power in a grounded world of reality, where you're like, we can't, like, if she comes into this place, everyone's going to know that she's a witch, and that's not good, because blah blah blah, you know, like all these types of things. I the only reason I bring it up is because I think that there can be interesting stories like that, but it takes a certain context, right? Like the idea of, well, Scarlet Witch can stop this bad guy. It's like you have a good guy versus bad guy scenario, and it's like, sure. But in a world of like, I'm just trying to live my life, and this person with magic is like making dogs grow wings just because she thinks it's fun, you're kind of like, that can't happen. We can't have people find out that we're witches because bad things can happen. You know, it all depends on the consequences.
Yeah. Persecution is so often a part of it for witch stories. So Danny actually mentioned in the chat, and I cannot believe this slipped my mind, but witches, like, how do you forget the comic Witches when you're thinking about witch comics like that? It's literally like called Witches.
Scott Snyder and Jock with a Y.
Oh my God. I love that book so much. That's one of those comics where I'm like, okay, do I have it in singles? Yes. Do I have it in singles digitally? Yes. Do I have the collected trade paperback? Of course I do. Did I give them all my money? And then they betrayed me by making volume 2 be part of that like Image magazine bullshit. And so I didn't have access to it. And so I'm like, well, thanks a lot. But that's an interesting one to talk about, because in that one, your main characters and heroes aren't witches. Witches are the monsters they're like the scary thing out to get you. And I think that is a completely different idea of witches in comics, but I really like those stories too, of like
Sure.
they're the baddie and the thing you're fighting.
Yeah, I mean, the witches book is interesting because to me, it's less about magic and it's more about just horrible monsters that they happen to call witches. It's kind of weird.
But they do have like the coven aspect to them. They are like, and the idea of like had magic twisted to them and stuff, and they get people to do horrible things, and they are casting spells. Like it is, they still feel very much to me like witches, but they're witches in the sense of like witches and werewolves and vampires, of all the scary different types of monsters, right? Which is very different than thinking about like a hero with powers.
Sure. Kait Lamphere, have you read that book before? I don't know if horror is necessarily your bag.
I do really enjoy witches, yeah.
Okay.
I have not finished it yet.
Okay.
This is another one where I've read the first volume a few times.
Well, but the volume 2, I don't know how you even get it without getting that stupid Image magazine thing. So I think you might be stuck.
I think they must have reprinted it.
Did they? Because I haven't seen it that way.
Well, someone send me an email. Let me know if it's out there. Yeah, I don't know. I those are pretty much everything. All the books that I was thinking of. Kait Lamphere, Kate Scott, just either of you have any other books you wanted to bring up for today?
I think we pretty much hit it for me. There's others that I've read that come to mind, like Moonstruck is another series by Grace Ellis. And it works, but like I wasn't in love with it. But there's so many out there of these different using the magic as a way to get through the world and as analogies for different types of identity and issues that come with that I enjoy. And I feel like that's a more recent thing that I've seen a lot more books doing, using witchcraft that way. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't for me in terms of just like an enjoyable thing.
Sure.
How about you guys?
I have a long list of books that I put in our notes, but I won't go through all of them. I have recently been reading a manga called A Witch's Printing Office. This is by Mochinshi and Yasuhiro Miyama. And this is a really interesting and unique manga. I mean, I feel like I could say that about every manga, but it starts with a girl being transported to a magic world where there aren't really very many books, and she starts a printing business and organizes what is basically like a book festival.
I love it.
And everybody, I mean, I can't say everybody, but a lot of the characters can only do like one spell. So she's kind of limited to the one spell that she can do, and then all of her employees are like good at like one thing.
So you guys read a lot of manga and I don't, and I'm wondering if you notice a difference in the concept of witches or how it's done, or like the witch tropes in manga versus the witch tropes in Western comics.
I mean, absolutely. Like, I think that there is something more whimsical and just lighthearted about witches in like manga versus, I think, you know, even in lighthearted comics in the United States, there's very much, or in the West, there's very much like this. There's nothing nefarious necessarily, but it's like a naturalistic connection to the world. Whereas I think witches in manga, at least are the ones that I've read, you know, like I've read Flying Witch and Ron in the Grey World and Wish Had Atelier. There is an attachment to nature, but it's almost like a sanctity of nature that is related to like a historical, just kind of hidden behind the scenes, not in a nefarious way, but because, you know, we can't expose magic to everybody kind of way. Whereas I think in the United States or in the West, you see there's like, we have a lot more persecution.
Yep.
Not that wasn't maybe a thing in Japan, but there's a lot more persecution things. And there's a lot of like, we have to hide this for our own safety. We have to hide ourselves, you know, the magic that we do, because when, you know, people get a hold of this power, it can be really, really bad. I don't know. That's my take. Kait Lamphere, have you noticed anything like that?
I agree. Yeah, there's always some kind of negative effect of the magic, or some reason that they're trying to hide it, some reason that somebody's not going to accept it in American comics versus in manga. Yeah, you're right. It is a lot more whimsical. And if there is some like negative effect, it's like when they're too powerful, you know, instead of being hated.
Right. And again, maybe Kait and I have only just been reading like shoujo and shonen manga, so like maybe we don't know. I'd be curious to know if anybody out there has any like adult-oriented manga out there about witches in some capacity. And I'm sure there's some out there, but from what I've read, it seems like there is a kind of more general acceptance of magic, and people are like, "Oh wow, we're meeting a magic user," versus like oh no, there's a magic user and we should probably stop them because they could hurt us, you know. There's just a weird negative connotation, I think, that comes with Western comics around magic users and witches in particular.
Well, it's all about women's power, and women's power is scary, remember? So
yeah, that is true. You two scare the shit out of me.
Good. Well, you know.
Sorry, that was a stupid joke. Well, yeah, I the only other book that I could think of for this was Mega Hex, and I won't recommend anyone read it, but the main character is a witch. Her name is Meg, and while she is a witch, I don't think she performs any magic. She just smokes a lot of weed.
Okay.
The end. That's all that there is. To me, there might be some bigger thing that Simon Hanselman, who creates this book, may be saying, not about just witches, but about all the characters in the show, that no one is actually a werewolf, or no one's actually an owl, no one's actually a witch. They're just the perception of the like strangeness that they are. Like one character who's an owl, whose name is Owl, might just be his, like him being seen as an owl might be just his perception of, or him being perceived as an owl because he's like ridden with anxiety and he's skittish and so on and so forth. Or because like there's a guy named Werewolf Jones who is a werewolf except for when he's not on drugs. It's really bizarre. So like, I don't know, but regardless, Mega Hex is another book that I thought of.
So the idea is drugs make you a monster?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe.
Okay.
We'll see. Except for the whole story is about them doing drugs all the time. So
do witches usually have familiars in manga, or is that more of a Western thing?
Oh yeah. I think like every witch book that I've read from a manga features a cat.
I love it.
Capacity. But yeah, well, I guess I think thanks you guys for bringing up all the comics. I'm sure that there's a ton of stuff that we missed because, like I said, the more I think about it, the more there are tons and tons of comics that feature witches or are about witches and magic and stuff. I tried to read a couple from the Shonen Jump app. I wasn't a fan of most of them. They seemed a little bit too weird and gag manga oriented, and I kind of just don't run with that most of the time. So I'm sure that there's manga and stuff out there, and I'd love to get some recommendations, like I said, from folks about like adult-oriented manga that are about witches or magic users. So, yeah, I guess thanks you guys for anything else. Any last thoughts? Any number one witch comics that you recommend to people?
I think if you are like, I gotta go read some witch comics right now, going on your Hoopla app and pulling the Black Magic volumes. Like it's a completed series. It's long, but not too long. It's just so much fun, and it is so seasonally appropriate. Wait for your like gray, rainy, windy autumn day and just light that candle. You're ready to go.
For sure. Kait, what about you?
I think I'll just leave it at there because I could keep going for a while.
Oh, okay. So double recommendations for Black Magic. I'm still going to recommend Witch Hat Atelier, but if you want something that's a little bit more just kind of off the cuff and less precise about magic, I highly recommend Ron in the Grey World. It's a wonderfully beautiful book, despite some of the skeeviness that the book has in the opening. It's very, very good. So yeah, highly recommend that. But anyway, so that'll wrap up the show for us. Thank you everybody for listening. Next week, our show is a continuation of an I Read Comic Books movie club episode from Patreon. It's okay if you haven't seen it or haven't listened to it, but we highly recommend you watch Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2 because we're going to be focusing in on Sam Raimi's movies, particularly the first two, with Brian and Paul and myself as we talk about the evolution of superhero movies after Spider-Man. It's going to be very, very exciting because I forget how much I love those movies. And when I rewatched the first one for our movie club, I was brought right back to being a 7th grader and being desperately in love with Kirsten Dunst and wanting to be Spider-Man and all this stuff. So really, really excited to talk about that for next week. But after that, you can follow us all on Twitter. You can follow Kait at Kait Elfier. You can follow me at Mike Rappin, and you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast on Twitter and Instagram.
This episode first aired on Patreon and is possible because of our wonderful patrons. Join today for exclusive series like the IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, and more. Join now at patreon.com/IRCB podcast.
If you haven't already, please rate and review our show, 5 stars, if you will, on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps us spread the word about IRCB. You can also join the IRCB Discord community to chat comics and more and listen to our episodes live as we record. And it would help us a lot if you tell your friends or your local comic shop about the show as well.
Infinity Shred continues to be the best band in the universe. We can't thank them enough for all their music over the years. Xander is a cool guy who makes us sound good. great every week. I mean, I was going to say good, but he makes it sound great. I want to say thanks to Hannah and Hugh and Danny and Nick for hanging out with us in the Discord. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone out there who listens to the show and shares it and tells your friends about it. You know, we love you folks. So until next time, comics are good, and so are you.